So back to Joseph here. The reasons that his brothers, of course, are feeling angry about Joseph's blessings here. First of all, obviously, he's the 11th born. But there's some other reasons, too. He's very full of himself. He's arrogant, maybe conceited. I don't know, but definitely very, very arrogant. And he likes to rub his privilege in his brothers' faces, so to speak. And now, this is different than being unethical. Joseph is not at all like his father Jacob, okay? Joseph is not, trying to steal something from them or trying to deal with them dishonestly or anything like that. He's just full of himself. And he apparently loves to make his brothers crazy. So not only does the father love Joseph more, but God also seems to love Joseph more, because God has given Joseph a gift that none of the rest of them have, and it's the gift of a seer. Joseph actually has dreams that can foretell the future. And by the way, having the dreams is not the biggest thing. Being able to interpret them correctly, that's huge. And not only can Joseph interpret them correctly, but if you have a dream and you don't know what it is, what it means, he can interpret it for you. And we'll see this later on as we get on with this story. So the brothers recognize this gift, and that probably really upsets them. Joseph's arrogance in terms of his position really makes them mad. And you might have heard the story of how his father, Jacob, Israel, makes Joseph a coat of many colors. It's called, in one of the older translations, there actually was a Broadway musical that came out when I was very young called Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's from this same story. Anyway, what Israel gives his son Joseph as a present is a coat of many colors. And this is probably a coat made of many different pieces of material that are dyed different colors and then sewn together in a particular pattern or something like that. Probably not tie-dye, sorry about that, deadheads. But still, this is very flashy and ostentatious wear for a shepherd foreman, And so not only are all the sons foremans over the other under shepherds, the other, servants that are taking care of the flocks and herds, but Jacob, Israel, puts Joseph over all of them. And so Joseph's the one that goes out and supervises his other 10 brothers and what's going on. And so, this is something that they're not happy about. So something finally happens. That's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, if you're familiar with the metaphor. Imagine a fully packed camel that can barely stand up, and somebody just takes one straw and just drops it on top of the load that's on the camel's back, and that one little portion of an ounce and the camel goes down. The straw that broke the camel's back then is that Joseph has a dream. Actually, he has 2 dreams, but what happens in the dreams is that he sees all of his brothers bowing down, prostrate on their faces before him in servitude or in reverence or worship or something. And he thinks that this is amazing. So the first time he has this dream, he thinks this is the greatest dream ever. I'm going to run out and tell all my brothers, if you already have older brothers that hate you and are probably already thinking about how much they would like to do something horrible to you, and you have a dream where they're all on their faces, like in reverence or servitude to you, I would not tell your brothers the dream. That's just not a good idea. But again, Joseph's too full of himself, and he runs out and tells them all the dream, and this puts them over the line. They're done. And so what ends up happening is that a conspiracy is hatched to kill Joseph. And so on the following day, when Joseph actually ends up out in an area where there's nobody else around to see, they've kind of like led him out there for some reason. This is the plan, they're going to kill him, and they're going to throw him in this deep pit. They're going to get rid of him this way. Again, skipping some of the details of the story. In the end, they can't do it. They can't bring themselves to kill their brother, as much as they do hate him. But they can't let him go home to his father either. Now he knows that they were contemplating this. And what ends up happening is a slave caravan comes through the area that is headed to Egypt, to sell slaves. And so what happens is the brothers sell their brother Joseph to the slave traders to take him to Egypt to sell him as a slave. What are they going to tell their father? What they do is they take his coat of many colors and they rip it up, and then they take a young kid, a young baby goat, and, pour its blood all over the coat of many colors that's all ripped up. And then they bring it back to the father and, basically say, we never found Joseph, but we found his coat. Look, and of course it's covered with blood and it's ripped up. And so Jacob, Israel, is sure that Joseph is dead. He has no reason to believe that his, 10 oldest sons would do harm to his firstborn, his favorite, He doesn't believe they're capable of that. I don't think that ever enters his mind. He believes Joseph is dead. And by the way, shepherds, don't ever think of shepherds as being, effeminate or pansy boys, or, think of a cute little guy holding a lamb. Shepherds are badasses, okay? You want to protect your flocks and herds, not only from humans who would try to steal some, but wild animals, whether it's lions or bears or whatever. I mean, you got to fight these animals so they don't take your sheep and your lambs. So being a shepherd, is not something for a pansy boy. You're a badass. So apparently the father just thinks, he must have had to fight off a lion or something and made a wrong move, and the lion managed to kill him and drag him away for dinner or something like that. So Jacob, Israel, is sure that his son Joseph is dead. And he's grieving. Seriously grieving. Joseph was the joy of his life. He's lost his beloved wife Rachel. Now he's lost his beloved son, his pride and joy Joseph, and he's a broken man. What does he have left? He has Benjamin. And when you say Benjamin's the son of the right hand, oh my gosh, he's really the son of the right hand now. This is a dysfunctional relationship. Jacob, Israel, is so afraid of now losing the last thing that's meaningful to him, Benjamin, that he won't let him out of his sight. So he really is the son of his right hand, might as well be surgically stapled to his hip. So, and by the way, the older brothers, they're not going after Benjamin. I mean, Benjamin now is the firstborn. As ironic as it is that he's that young, but the older brothers are not going after Benjamin. Benjamin has done nothing to be arrogant, and they feel so bad. And let me just color this in for you. It doesn't spell it out, but anybody reading this story closer to the time would understand that a son's greatest responsibility in this life is to bring honor to their father. For a son to shame their father, or to bring sorrow to their father, or kill their father with sorrow, I mean, that's a horrible legacy. I mean, better to kill yourself than to be known as the guy that, brought his father's gray head down to the grave in sorrow. That's such a shameful legacy. And here they are, and they see that what they have done has broken their father. He's a broken man. He's not the man he used to be. And the 10 of them have to know that they're responsible for this, and yet they can never tell him. They can never confess to it at all. What kind of weight of guilt and shame are they bearing? It's got to be taking a heavy toll on them, okay? So they're not going after Benjamin. They're dealing with this however they're dealing with this, but this is a big deal. This is not something that they can every morning see their father who gets up and never smiles and just, is, I don't know, dysfunctionally hanging on to Benjamin and has nothing else in life that really, means anything to him. And they have to know that they're responsible for putting him in this situation. The guilt must be killing him. Anyway, let's forget about them for now. Joseph's getting taken to Egypt, where he is, of course, going to be sold as a slave, as we said. He has the good fortune to be sold as a slave to one of Pharaoh's administrators, an official named Potiphar. And by the way, I'm not going to ask you about Potiphar's name or anything like that, but he is a house servant. I mean, he has to wear nice clothes and probably sleeps on a comfortable bed inside. And so, I mean, as far as a slave goes, this is probably one of the best gigs you could possibly have. And so Joseph, remember, he has favor from God on him. I mean, yes, he may be an arrogant fool, and you already see that God's going to have to fix him, right? Just as God had to fix the corrupt nature of his father Jacob, God is going to have to fix the arrogance, of Joseph. And I guess being rejected by your brothers and sold into slavery is a good first step to sufficiently humbling you, knocking you down a step or two. Oh, but God's not done. What ends up happening is, even as a servant, Joseph is blessed in everything that he does. And Potiphar's household begins to be blessed. And so Potiphar gives more and more responsibility to Joseph until Joseph is handling all of the financial and business affairs of the house. And the house is prospering, because of God's blessing on Joseph. So, now we're looking pretty good again. But the story's not over. Potiphar has a wife who is apparently sexually frustrated. And I'm not sure why, whether Potiphar has mistresses or he's gone a lot, or maybe he has EED. You've heard of that, right? Egyptian erectile dysfunction. Anyway, for whatever reason, Potiphar's wife is really attracted to Joseph. She wants to sleep with Joseph. And she has been trying for some time. She's really been kind of a nuisance to Joseph. Joseph's trying to avoid her. And finally, it gets to the point where she's just not going to take no for an answer. And she actually takes Joseph and tries to physically sleep with him. And Joseph literally flees from her. But as he flees, his house coat or whatever ends up being left in her hands. And she's furious now. You may have heard the old saying that hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned. Well, this would be a good example. She really wanted Joseph, but now she wants nothing worse than to hurt him the worst way she can, the way he's rejected her. So she takes this coat of his to her husband and says, this servant of yours came in and just tried to rape me, and I fought him off, and look, he even left his coat in the room. Well, of course, this isn't true. But who's going to be believed in a court of law? The wife of an Egyptian aristocrat or a foreign shepherd that's a slave? So Joseph is thrown in prison. Oh my gosh, this is more than humbling. This is humiliation, okay? He is in prison for something he did not do. In prison, however, both the wardens and the other prisoners very quickly figure out that this guy, he couldn't have done what they say he did. Remember, he does have this blessing, this favor from God on him, and he is a person of ethical qualities. I mean, he would never sleep with his master's wife. That's just way over the line for him. He may have had a problem being arrogant and self-centered and all of that, but no, he's not ethical. He's not stealing things. He's not cheating. He's not committing adultery. That's just not something that he would do. And at this point, of course, he's not feeling too great about himself either. He's been sufficiently humbled. But he still has this gift working in his life, this favor from God, that what he gets involved in is blessed. And remember, he has this gift as a seer. So both the wardens and the other prisoners recognize that this is a special guy. And as the story goes, he has two different occasions to interpret dreams that two different employees of Pharaoh have. And very briefly, one of them, he interprets the dream to say that, you're going to be promoted and yay, And the other one, he interprets the dream that, you're going to die. You're going to be put to death. And both of the prophecies come true. One of them is actually promoted and honored, and the other one is killed. And so all of the other people, they have a great deal of reverence for Joseph. Yes, he's still a prisoner, but he's probably a trustee. Nobody bothers to lock his door or anything. So he has a great deal of respect. Real quick aside, why am I saying seer and not prophet? A prophet, by definition, is someone who is bringing a message from God. Now, they may have an ability to see into the future. They may have an ability to do some other miracle, but prophet has nothing to do with seeing into the future or doing miracles per se. You can do miracles and see into the future and not be a prophet if God has not given you a message to bring to his covenant community. A prophet brings a message to God's covenant people. It might be a message of encouragement. More often than not, it's a message of warning. You're breaking the covenant. Stop it. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. So I say seer because he's seeing into the future and correctly interpreting these dreams with incredible symbolism. But there's no place where it says that God has given him some message to proclaim or something like that. So we wouldn't call him a prophet. But anyway, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has a whole staff of wise men, seers, prophets, soothsayers, whatever you want to call them, sages. All kings do. And whenever they need a little bit of extra information, they're going to consult their wise men. Is it a good day to go to battle? And the wise men say, I did these particular rituals and I saw, this horrible omen. Don't go today. Well, the king's going to listen to them. And so also if the king would have some kind of a dream, very disturbing dream, he would go to the wise men and say, what does this mean? Well, it's exactly what happens. Pharaoh has a very disturbing dream. And for some reason, he believes that there's something to it. He knows it's not just, stomach upset from last night's pepperoni pizza. This dream means something. And the symbolism is compelling, but he has no idea what it means. So he calls his wise men. This is Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, calls his wise men, and they cannot interpret the dream to him, which makes him quite angry, I'm sure. By the way, if you're a seer and you want to get a good gig, working for a king is a very good gig, but you better know what you're doing. Because there are cases where seers or prophets have not interpreted something correctly, and a king has put the whole lot of them to death as a result of it. So if you don't get it right, it can be a dangerous position to be in. Fortunately, these seers that can't interpret the dream are not put to death or anything, because they tell him, look, we know there's somebody who has a gift. He can interpret this dream. He's the dude. His name's Joseph. And so Pharaoh says, bring me the Hebrew. So they bring Joseph to him. And I'll spare you the whole dream and all the symbolism, but Joseph's interpretation to Pharaoh is this: you are going to have 7 years of the most abundant harvests you've ever seen. But after these 7 years, you're going to have 7 years of the worst famine you've ever seen. So here's what you need to do. During the 7 years where you have the abundance, the next 7 years, build all kinds of new storehouses, silos, whatever, and take all of this extra grain and store it up, because that's the only way that you're going to survive the 7 years of famine that are going to follow. Pharaoh is very impressed, and let me try to explain why. Not only has Joseph interpreted the dream, but he has interpreted that a blessing is going to come and a curse is going to come. But the blessing is the means to avoid the curse, and Joseph has told him how to do it. So I want you to get this. Joseph is not, sometimes, prophets get called before kings, and they have a message where they're supposed to rebuke the king, and, God is going to humble you, and God's going to punish you. And this is nothing like this, okay? Here is a guy who's a foreigner. He's not even an Egyptian. He has a blessing from a strange God that, Pharaoh may not even be really familiar with, but he clearly has this power that many people that Pharaoh trusts have attested to, and now he has interpreted Pharaoh's dream, and this is important, he's on Pharaoh's side. He's telling Pharaoh what to do to turn this information into a blessing, to escape the curse that is coming. So this implies not only that Joseph is on Pharaoh's side, but the God that gives Joseph his power must be on Pharaoh's side. And that God has somehow been responsible for sending Joseph to give this message to Pharaoh. So, and you got to think like an ancient polytheist for it to work for you. Hopefully you can bracket a little bit. So Pharaoh is very, very impressed. And Pharaoh does the most logical thing. The one that has told him exactly what he needs to do and is, blessed by this God with the power to see this. He puts Joseph in charge of this whole operation over the next 7 years of collecting all of the extra grain and building new storehouses and storing it all up, puts Joseph in charge of it. Again, hopefully you can see through Pharaoh's eyes. This is the smartest thing to do. So, I'm not sure exactly what the exact percentages were, but, people who normally might have given, 10% of their crops to the crown are probably giving like 90% now, because they're bringing forth so much more grain that the vast majority of it is going to the king, their tribute, their taxes, their tithe, whatever you want to call it. And they're still getting just as much grain as they had before. That's how much more the land is building. So Joseph's responsible for collecting all the grain and building the storehouses to store it up. So Joseph goes from being a prisoner to a position where he's kind of like a cross between the minister of agriculture and the head of the internal revenue, if you want to put it in modern terms, because he's over all the agriculture of the land. But that's how people pay their taxes or their tribute, is in crops. So this is a very high position for him to be in the day after he's a prisoner. So for 7 years, he does his job. He's very successful. He stores up lots and lots of grain, and then the famine hits. And oh my gosh, the famine hits hard. However, they take an inventory and they find out that we're in good shape. We have more than enough food. We have enough food for us to survive the next 7 years easily with a whole bunch left over. And how convenient is that? Because the famine has not just hit Egypt. The famine has hit all around this Middle East and Mediterranean area here. And so all of these other nations are starving. Only Egypt has food. So what are we going to do with the rest of this? Well, we're going to obviously sell it. So Pharaoh does the smartest thing he can possibly do. He put Joseph in charge of this operation, and look what happened. He's sitting pretty. So put Joseph in charge of the new operation. What's the new operation? Well, first of all, you got to sell food back to your own citizens, and we can assume they're getting a much better deal than those from other countries. But Joseph is actually the one that has to meet ambassadors and dignitaries from other countries who are coming to try to enter into some kind of covenant with Egypt, where Egypt will save them out of famine. So Joseph's not just running a store where he's, deciding who to sell to, deciding how much he'll sell to them, deciding what price it's going to be. He's entering into covenants with other nations. This is like prime minister. I mean, there's like no higher position than Pharaoh himself. So we might just make one observation here. If God had not done that work in Joseph's life, humbling him over all of those years, and it just put him right into a position like that with that arrogant attitude that he'd had to start with, how much of a disaster would that have been? So God gets him ready for this position he's going to put him in, but first he's got to cure him of this arrogance, as we mentioned. Now, back up in Canaan, or Canaan land, who's starving? Everybody, including Joseph's father, Israel, aka Jacob, all of his brothers, his 11 brothers, their wives, their children, in some cases their grandchildren, their servants, their flocks and herds. I mean, famine. So somehow Israel hears that there is food in Egypt. And so he calls his 10 oldest sons to go to Egypt and to get the grain that they need to survive this famine. Not Benjamin. Benjamin no ba. Benjamin stays with dad, okay? Dad doesn't let him out of his sight. You remember this dysfunctional relationship this broken man has with the last vestige of anything that he considers to be worth anything. So the 10 brothers go to Egypt. And when they get to Egypt, who do they have to come in front of? They have to appear before Joseph. They do not recognize Joseph. Why not? Well, he's, first of all, probably looks totally different. Probably doesn't have, long hair, probably has closely cropped hair. Doesn't have like the beard of a shepherd anymore. Probably clean shaven, probably wearing some kind of headdress, wearing tight-fitting clothes, and of course speaking Egyptian. And he has this really cool eye makeup that you put on with Sharpies, and so they would never recognize him. Plus, it's never entered their mind that they might run into Joseph there. That's just not even a possibility. And who knows, they might have gotten some instruction that, when you come before him, bow before him, don't look him right in the face, whatever. So anyway, they come before Joseph. Joseph completely recognizes them immediately and knows these are the 10 brothers. But Joseph doesn't tell them who he is. Why? Because he wants to find something out first. What does he want to find out? Well, obviously there's 3 things that you could come up with. The first 2, he probably would like to know what's up with dad. Is dad still alive or whatever? But he's really concerned with his brother Benjamin. Because remember, Benjamin is his real brother, his full brother, not his half brother, but his full brother. And the brothers that tried to, that despised him, did they end up despising Benjamin too? Is Benjamin safe? So he probably wants to know these things. But the greater issue, have his brothers changed? Have they changed? I mean, it's been years. Have they changed? So he's going to find out, and he has a way to do it. So what he does is he accuses them of being spies. This is masterful. They probably expect this. If you want to conquer a country, do you just go in with your army and go, oh, we're rolling the dice, hope we don't all die? Of course not. You do reconnaissance first. You send in spies to figure out what's up, okay? And with everybody starving and everybody at this point wanting what Egypt has, you've got to figure there are probably spies all over Egypt. And they're, posturing, pretending to be merchants or pretending to be whatever. And so to accuse them of being spies, come in to spy out the land, is probably what they expect. And they're apparently ready to defend themselves. So the 10 brothers are defending themselves to this ruler they don't know as Joseph. And they say, no, we're not spies. We're shepherds. Our father's really, really elderly, back up in Canaan. And our younger brother is up there with him too. We're shepherds. We're not spies, whatever. And so Joseph continues with the ruse and says that he doesn't really believe them, but he says, I'll give you a chance to prove it. He says, I'm going to keep one of you here, and I'm going to send the rest of you, the 9 of you, home, and I'm going to give you food. Okay, you'll be good for a while, but you won't make it through the whole famine. You're going to have to come back here, and you're going to have to get more. And when you come back here to get more, you bring that young brother that you told me that you had up in Canaan, and you show him to me, and then I'll know you're telling the truth and you're not spies. And then you can have your older brother back that I'm going to keep here imprisoned until you get back. Well, the 10 older brothers are all, Scheiße. This is not good. I mean, it's especially not good for the brother who is going to be staying there, but who knows, maybe he'll at least be eating well, But why is it bad? Because Dad's not going to let Benjamin go anywhere. Remember how dysfunctional he is. And they're right, by the way. The last thing that Jacob does is when they're not looking, he calls a servant and says, look, I want you to take all the money they paid me and put it back in their bags. So when they get home and they tell their dad, one of them is not with us, and he doesn't get released until we go back and show them Benjamin to prove we weren't lying, the father, Israel, is furious and says, why did you tell him you had a younger brother? And they said, well, he made us tell him everything. It's technically not true. They offered the information. But of course, Israel says exactly what they think he's going to say. Benjamin no va. He's not going. Sorry. We'll stay here till the food runs out and we'll starve. Benjamin is not going anywhere. And when they discovered that their money is back in the bags, now they're really, really upset. How in the world did the money end up in the bags? And maybe he thinks that we stole the money and, oh my God, I don't know. So this is tense. Now, what ends up happening? Well, the food finally runs out and they're starving. And, Israel's been very, very resolute. He's not sending Benjamin anywhere. But, when you're starving to the point where your stomach is starting to eat itself, you can have a change of heart. But there's more to it than that. There's more to Israel's change of heart. What does he have? He has Benjamin. And what's substantial about Benjamin? He is the heir of the covenant. He is the heir of the covenant. He is the one that God's promise rests on. He is the only remaining son of number one wife. Benjamin gets the right of the firstborn. Benjamin gets the covenant from God. Now, if Benjamin just stays there, what's going to happen? They're all going to starve to death, including Benjamin. And God's promises cannot come to fulfillment. Why? Because of Israel's lack of faith, because of Jacob's lack of faith. So Jacob is actually being put in a situation not unlike Abraham on Moriah, because he is being told to take the heir of the promise, which to him is Benjamin, it's all he's got left, and send Benjamin into a strange land where the chances are probably good he'll never come back again, and he may lose him. But if he doesn't do this, God's covenant will never be realized because he doesn't trust enough to put Benjamin in the hands of God. So when Israel finally relents and sends Benjamin to Egypt with his 9 older brothers, for him, it's very much the same kind of faith as when Abraham put Isaac on the altar at Moriah. Israel is sending Benjamin into possible damage or death, trusting God. Because God said that you'll have a multitude of descendants. And if Benjamin is the one that is going to be the heir of this promise, then Benjamin has to be alive. If Benjamin is not alive, then God's broken his promise. And so Israel has to get over his dysfunctional obsession, and he has to let Benjamin go. Very much the same kind of resolution, act of faith, as Abraham putting Isaac on the altar at Moriah. So, the 9 brothers come back with Benjamin, and they come before Joseph again. And they say, look, we don't know what happened, but somehow, the money ended up back in our bags, and here's all the money. We didn't spend it. Look, we don't know how. Here's the money for the, they're afraid that he thinks they stole the money or something. Of course, he doesn't care about the money. What he wanted them to do was to bring back Benjamin, and he sees Benjamin. He hasn't seen Benjamin in years, so Benjamin's probably grown up into a nice-looking young man, and Joseph is just overwhelmed emotionally and runs out of the room. He can't stay in the room. He's all verklempt. He has to go have a good cry somewhere. But he goes in the back room and pulls himself together, redoes all the Sharpie makeup that's run all over his face, and comes back out when he's pulled himself together and basically says, okay, you proved it. I believe that, you're not spies. But he still doesn't tell him who he is. And remember, he's speaking in Egyptian. He has translators speaking, but he really understands everything his brothers are saying. But he's only speaking in Egyptian, so they assume that he needs the translator to tell what they're saying. But he hears everything they really say. So he says, okay, I'll sell you. I'll sell you food. So they let the one brother out. Now there's 11 of them. He sells them 11 big bags of grain. But then he calls another servant over, and he says, look, when nobody is looking, because I want you to take this cup, and I want you to put it in the bag of that youngest brother over there. Don't let anyone see you. Now, by the way, this cup, guys, country fans, this is not a solo cup, okay? This is the kind of cup fit for a king. I mean, it might be made out of gold or silver, might have jewels encrusted on it, but it's something that's worth a lot of money, okay? And so this is stashed in Benjamin's bag. So, as you can see, Joseph is not done with his charade yet. So he lets them go, blesses them, sends them on their way, lets them get a ways out, and then sends the soldiers to arrest them. Drags them back in and feigns anger and says, I sold you food to save you out of this famine, and you steal from me? Really? Well, at this point, all the brothers is saying, we would never do that. We would never do that. What happens here is he has the servants go through the bags of the brothers, and from the oldest to the youngest, goes through all the bags, gets to Benjamin's last, and they open the bag and they go, found it! Here it is. Oh my God. Benjamin stole it? Benjamin is guilty? Of course, the 10 older brothers are, at this point, they're really, really upset. When their father Israel sent them to Egypt, he gave them a charge. He said, I charge you before God. He says, you bring this young boy back to me safely. If you don't, you send your father's gray head to the grave in sorrow. Now that may just sound like poetry, but remember that legacy? To send your father to the grave in sorrow, to kill your father with sorrow, that's a legacy no one can bear. And these older brothers, they promised their father, will bring him back. Everything's changed. At one point, they wanted Joseph gone. At this point, saving Benjamin is number one priority for all of them. They are not going to kill their father with sorrow this way. And so Judah is actually the one that goes forward and pleads with this ruler, of course, does not know it's Joseph, and offers, to stay, to be a slave for life, or to pay the price, or whatever. Just please, our father's very old. He's going to die soon. This son means everything to him, and he told us if you don't send the boy home, you kill me with sorrow, and look, we'll stay, we'll be your servants, whatever. Just please send the young boy back to his father. Why might this work? Well, because elder reverence is huge in this point in time. His whole reason for suggesting this is reverence for his father, which is a very honorable thing. Do you have that among kings and royalty? Oh, yes. In fact, sometimes among kings and royalties, they think that the king is a son of the gods or something like that. So elder reverence is also huge. So this is a good argument, if you will, for mercy, please, for our old father who's ready to die. Don't let him die with a broken heart. And at this point, we don't have to continue the conversation because Joseph knows his brothers have changed. The same brothers that wanted him dead are now willing to give their lives for Benjamin. And so at this point, he reveals who he is. And I would love to see the look on his brothers' faces when they find out. Oh my God. Well, anyway, so he gives them all kinds of good stuff and sends them back up to their father. And they go home and they bring back Benjamin. I mean, can you imagine Israel seeing Benjamin coming home and, oh no, he's okay. Oh, they get back and they go, you're not going to believe this. Guess who we ran into in Egypt? Joseph is alive, and he's a powerful ruler there. And Israel is probably shocked. Now let's stop for a moment, and let's look back at this motif. Okay? If Israel had never sent Benjamin, if he'd never put him on the altar, so to speak, he would have never even known that Joseph was alive. He not only got back the son that he entrusted to God, that he put on the altar, so to speak, but he got back the firstborn son that he thought was dead, the loss of whom he had been grieving for years. He gets him back too. This is an amazing story. So what happens is Joseph has said, look, take everything, bring everything, come down here, live with us, you'll be fine. Now, foreign shepherds are not very respected in Egypt, but this family's different. This family is the family of Joseph, who is somewhat of a hero in Egypt. And so they give them wonderful grazing lands, the land of Goshen, and they have a very, very good life there. Now, of course, Israel's very old, so he doesn't live that much longer. And eventually he dies. When Israel dies, the sons take his bones back up to Canaan to bury them, and then they come back to Egypt. They've been given permission to do this. And when they come back to Egypt, the 10 older brothers come before Joseph and they fall on their faces in terror and plead for their lives. Why do they do that? Simple. Think about elder reverences. You want your father to die in happiness. You want him to die in peace. You want him to die in joy. Joseph certainly wants his father to die in joy. I would not be surprised if the full details of how Joseph had gotten down there were not ever told to his father Israel, that somehow the whole story was kind of glossed over, because I wonder how devastating it would be to Israel to know that his 10 older sons actually had thought about killing Joseph. Maybe they've never even told him. I think it's likely they haven't. Because again, it's about elder reverence. Your father's finally happy again. Why do you want to tell him something to make him sad? Everything's fine, yay, we're all blessed. You can die in peace, Israel. But the thing is, the 10 older brothers apparently don't really know if Joseph's really forgiven them or if he's just pretending. So Israel does not die in sorrow. But now Israel's dead. Joseph can do whatever he wants to them, and Israel will not see it. It won't bring any sorrow to Israel at all. He's gone. He died in peace. Now Joseph can pay them back. So what they're afraid of is that Joseph's just pretending to forgive them, but now that Israel's gone, he's going to take care of them. So they're on their faces pleading for their life. And what Joseph tells them, this is a very, very important motif. What Joseph tells them at this point, obviously he has truly forgiven them. And he says, fear not. He goes, I know you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And he sent me here before you to save you out of this famine. Now we got to unpack this. First of all, I know you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Clearly, God can use the evil intentions of people to bring about his blessings. So you don't necessarily have to be on point with God's plan. You can actually be fighting against God's will, and God can use your rebellion to bring about his will. He can use the evil intent in people's hearts to bring about the blessing he wants to bring about. So that's the first thing here, but this goes much deeper than this. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. God often uses things that are meant for evil and turns them into good. He does this over and over and over again. Now, I want to reiterate something that I've told you before when we were talking about the Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism, when we were talking about the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, and that is this. Even if you are not a Jew, if you're part of some other religion, there's something that we're going to talk about here that is important, that really can be useful if you put it into practice in your life. And the second thing I will say is, even if you're not religious at all, even if you're a philosophical atheist, and I told you this with the Bhagavad Gita, I told you this with the Four Noble Truths, even if you're an atheist, there's wisdom in these teachings that you can apply to your life and have a higher quality of life. You can actually use it for your benefit, even if you don't believe there's a God who is in control of your life, or using bad things to bring about good products. So what we're going to talk about first is the religious way of looking at this, but then I'm going to kind of bring out the non-religious way of looking at this as well, okay? First of all, God is bringing about blessing. Joseph is very happy with the blessing that God has brought forth. I mean, obviously he didn't like being sold into slavery and didn't like being falsely accused and going to prison and everything. But looking back, he's more than happy with everything that happened because he likes the way things turned out. Now, if you like the way things turned out, you want to accept the blessing that God is giving you. You can't go back and find fault with God for how he produced the blessing. If God puts you through some uncomfortable events so that you can have a wonderful blessing, and you love the blessing, but then you go back to God and go say, I really like the blessing, but you know what? You shouldn't have done it this way. That was the wrong way to do it. And obviously, anybody can see that that's an inappropriate attitude, okay? Receiving a blessing from God means accepting the way that God produced it. If he really is all-knowing and all-wise and he's going to do something the best way, then whatever way he chose to produce the blessing was the best way. Secondly, whatever in that story, I mean, from the beginning all the way to the end where God produces the blessing, all of the events in that story, if you look at them by themselves, you might go, that's a bad thing. But if you look at it in the context of the story, you're like, that's exactly what had to happen there. That's beautiful. Just exactly what you needed right there. Yes, that was what got me to see this. Yes, that's what moved me there. All of these things that by themselves, you might say are bad events, in the context of what God produced, they're not bad anymore. They're good. They're essential steps on the way to this blessing of God. And you have to look back and you have to reevaluate them. And by the way, when someone intends evil against you, or someone actually hurts you, and yet you look back as the recipient of a great blessing and see that that's exactly what needed to happen, that God wanted that to happen so that God could produce the blessing, then you have to accept that. You have to say, that was a good thing, that was what was necessary, and you have to forgive them. You can't hold grudges against God because of how he did something if you like the blessing you've received. And you can't hold grudges against people who might have willed for something to hurt you, but if God turned it around and used it as a blessing instead of letting this hurt you, then you have to forgive those people to receive the blessing. Receiving the blessing means saying that everything that happened to produce this blessing that was according to God's plan, that was according to God's will, was good. This was the way God intended it. To receive the blessing, I have to be okay with everything that was necessary to produce the blessing. Otherwise, you're not really going to receive it. Now, how in the world can you apply this if you're not even religious? Well, first of all, I think we all know that bitterness is a problem. And you may have heard many of the sayings about bitterness. Holding on to bitterness is like drinking a glass of poison and expecting the person that hurt you to die. It doesn't work that way. When you hold on to bitterness, the only person it hurts is you. Bitterness is like a cancer too. It spreads. It metastasizes. Are you familiar with the term? Most cancer starts in one organ. But if you don't find it early enough or treat it early enough, it will spread. And sometimes by the time people figure out they have cancer, it's in all kinds of different organs and it's just too late to do anything. Bitterness does the same thing. You may start out focused, your bitterness in one area, but later on in life, the bitterness is spread everywhere. It becomes the lenses through which you see every situation of your life. You know, imagining the same kind of things that hurt you before. You go into a situation and go, I wonder who's going to screw me over here. I wonder who's going to betray me here. I wonder who's going to not appreciate me here. And you probably know people like this. They've just grown more miserable as they've gotten older. Some people look 20, 30 years older than they are just because of the way this kind of bitterness ages you and the deep lines in your face. And oh my God. By the way, of all of the secrets to growing old graciously, number one is you got to forgive. You got to let this bitterness go. It will kill you. So there's that, whether you're religious or whether you're not. Now let's take it farther. Let's say that there's not a God that's working in your life necessarily, but it's just random events that happen. Okay, even in random events, let's say something bad happens. By itself seems to be disadvantageous. You choose how you respond to it. And most of you already know that in a crisis situation, there are better ways to respond. If you respond in the right way, you might be able to turn that into a blessing. You might end up learning. You might end up becoming wiser. You might end up becoming stronger. You might end up becoming more compassionate. You know, relationships that you have in the future might improve. Struggles you go through in the future, you might handle them much more effortlessly. Okay? If you respond to this crisis, this tragedy you're going through now in the right way. But if you respond to it in the wrong way, by hanging on to bitterness and letting that offense define you, you're on your way to being a miserable person and letting that bitterness kill you. Now we know this, right? So, going through these situations that are bad situations, when you see, oh my gosh, this bad situation here and this and that, and the way I responded to this, you know, this has turned out really well for me. I learned a lot through this, you know, because I asked myself, you know, what was it about me that made me respond this way? And I took this and I used it here. And so let's say that you're looking and you're saying, oh my gosh, the way I responded to these unfortunate events, you know, they've turned into a blessing for me. Well, then you can't go back and call them bad anymore. They're only bad events if you respond to them in a bad way and you let them kill you. But if you respond to them in a good way and you end up becoming a better person for it, then the event is good. Now, if you look at it all by itself, ethically, you might make the judgment, no, that's bad. I was betrayed, whatever. But looking at the results of it, you have to look back and say, no, that was good. You judge an event by the outcome of it. If the outcome is good, then the event is not bad in itself. You see it in the whole progression. Where am I right now? There are a lot of bad things in my life that if I could go back and change them, I would not be the person I am today. I was severely emotionally abused as a child. When I finally left home, I hated my mother, and my mother hated me. My dad was a good man. He had it worse than I did. But my mother was very abusive. She very often, even as a small child, would say that she was sorry that I was born. And, you know, I mean, this is hard for a kid to grow up with. It took me decades to overcome all of the ill effects in my life in terms of how I responded to situations in life. However, heal I did, and I had to survive. And what ended up happening was I ended up becoming a better person because of the things that I had to overcome. I ended up learning an awful lot about these kinds of situations. And by going through this healing that I went through, I was able to help a lot of other people in dealing with similar cases of abuse or, you know, unfair treatment or whatever it was, help them to respond in good ways to get over it, not just to minimize the bad effects, but actually to find a hidden blessing in this. I would not be the person that I am if I had not gone through these horrible situations. I wouldn't have been able to help as many people as I have. I wouldn't have the wisdom that I have in certain situations. I wouldn't have the fortitude and the strength and the power that I have in certain situations if I had not gone through what I had gone through. But the story gets better. I found out as an adult, I couldn't understand this as a child, but my mother was very emotionally abused as a child herself. Her father was like Satan. As bad as she was to me, once I found out what her father was like, she was great compared to him. She was doing the best she could. And she was so damaged that she, could not help but respond in the way she did many times, but still, she was a lot better than her dad. Her dad had just destroyed her, emotionally as a very young child. 5 years old. She already knew that her daddy hated her and it was a problem. And she started responding in the wrong way that early in life. And she wouldn't let anyone really inside after that. And so I understood a lot more about my mother. And you know what? All of the things that I went through had made me the kind of person that could actually have compassion for someone abused because I was abused. So later on in life, after my dad died, strangely enough, there came a point where I was my mother's only friend on earth. Her friends had all died, or some of them were just around because they liked my dad, and once he was gone, they weren't going to hang around with her. She ended up as an old woman with nobody there but me. The story gets better. She got severe dementia, and by the end of her life, she had forgotten almost all of her life. It's funny, there were only two things she remembered. She remembered that I was her son, and she loved me, even though she couldn't often remember my name. She'd forgotten her husband of 50 years. She'd forgotten all kinds of stuff. But the other thing she remembered was the way her father hated her as a child. And before my mother died at 96, severe dementia, can't remember much of anything, but reliving this childhood, it's almost like if there is a God, he took her right back to the place where she was originally damaged to heal her right there. Because I'm looking at a 96-year-old woman, and in her eyes, I see a 5-year-old girl. And she was looking at me. Understand, she would never have opened up to me or anyone. But all of her responses had been so stripped away. I'm looking at a 5-year-old child in the eyes of a 96-year-old woman, and she's looking at me, asking me, why did my father hate me? And I said, because he was an evil son of a bitch. You were a beautiful child. And she just went, oh. And that seemed to bring her some peace. And that was the end of her life. I was next to her bed as she was dying, as she was no longer able to consciously carry on a conversation. And I just kept talking to her, and I was the one that was there. I was the one that was there to forgive her and heal her. Now, here's my question. What part of this story would I like to change? What part of this story would I like to change? Nothing. None of it. Don't change a thing. If I had a time machine, I would not use it. How could this story have turned out any better at all? And so now when I look back on my life and everything that happened, I look back and I go, that's exactly the way it needed to happen for me to become who I am today. And if I went back and changed anything, I wouldn't be the person I am today. I wouldn't have this wonderful story to tell. So everything that happened to me, however painful at the time, I accept it and I say, that was a very important step in the story. Good, good, good. You reevaluate everything based on the outcome. Again, I wouldn't change anything about the story. Now, whether you believe that there's a God in your life that's directing everything, that's orchestrating all of this, that you can go, oh my God, how did you do this? This is amazing. Or whether you just think that it's because you learned how to respond positively to bad situations and learned how to turn them to your good. Either way, you're going to have to be okay with the story if you want to really receive the blessing or appropriate the benefit from going through this. You're going to have to be okay with the way the benefit was received. If you're hanging on to any kind of bitterness, any kind of frustrated, deferral of judgment for some way you were hurt or whatever, you're not going to receive the blessing. You're not going to experience the best outcome. You got to let it go. All right. We're at the end of the story here. of Joseph. Again, Israel's died. And over the next few decades, all of the brothers died. And once they have died, of course, we're at the end of the patriarchal age because this is the fourth generation. And we said the patriarchs are 4 generations. And what ends up happening after the last of the brothers dies, some point in the future, there is a change in dynasty. And the new dynasty that conquers the old dynasty that takes over does not consider the Hebrews their friends. And they don't treat them with the kind of favor that they had. And this is the beginning of all of the woes of the Hebrews in Egypt for 430 years. We're going to pick that up in the very next installment.